Hey everyone, welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast, and thanks for joining us on the epic adventure we call writing. We're your hosts,
Holly Robilliard.
Austin Matthews.
And Bob Adato. And today we're going to talk about self-editing with Richie Billings. Welcome, Richie.
Very much for having me.
Yeah. You're welcome. Well, we're going to get into in a little bit, and we're going to get into how we met you. But first, Richie, what do you have going on in the book world? Are you an author, or what kind of works are you doing?
Yeah, it's been quite a funny period because of obviously I know you guys through the writing because we're all writers.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I was spending probably too much time doing that side, and I wasn't really writing anything. So I started having a sort of a bit of a sort of crisis of like sort of self-doubt where I was like, I'm not writing anything. How can I really call myself a writer? And I was just stuck in like a couple of edits on two big projects as well, and I wasn't creating anything. So I was like, I'm just gonna have to start freeing up time. So I've had to sort of readjust everything, and now I'm just writing as much as I can and anything really. I'm editing a novel, editing a novella, and the novella I hope to bring out this year, but I don't know. I've said December, and I'm still editing, so
Yeah,
don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
But we'll see. And then just short stories. I love short stories. I've never really fancied myself as much of a short story writer because you just always end up becoming the first chapters of novels.
Yes.
You just can't end them. You know what I mean? I just don't know how to finish a short story. But I'm setting that as a bit of a challenge now. I want to try and master that sort of the short, snappy plot. So yeah, I'm just writing as much as I can, and it's been really, really good for the soul. That's how I describe it, because I have that connection with writing where you know it gives me a lot of purpose.
Yeah,
It feels good.
Yeah, I don't really like not writing, so I suppose I fell into a trap of like not writing enough, and I was getting quite grumpy and stuff like that, and it was affecting mood. It's quite I suppose you don't really, there's no way to get that creative energy out. So yeah, it's been really fun the last few months.
Yeah, I think I think for me it's something important to like always have something that I'm editing and then something that I'm writing so that I can have that balance, because otherwise at first like all I did was write because I like would be in that same spot. I'm like, oh, I don't want to edit, I want to be writing. And I'm like, well, I've got like 12 first drafts of different books. I'm like, I should probably at some point start editing instead of just writing more and more and more.
Yep, we're definitely on the right track with that, with our topic. Richie, where can we find you?
Probably the best place to go is websites.
Okay.
richiebilling.com. I do have social media, but I really despise social media. I just have it because it's part of the game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So I just but Instagram, Facebook's dead to me. X is dead to me. We talk about the Discord server in a little bit, but Facebook is part of the reason that came about. And yeah, Instagram, even though it's owned by Facebook, I like a few things on there. Like I like plants, as you can tell.
Oh, yeah. You have some very lovely plants back there.
I've got 37 plants in this room.
Oh, that's all.
Gosh.
Oh, wow.
Still room for more. But yeah, so I just like following people who like post tips about plants.
Oh.
So
yeah, there's some really good ones out there.
That's just helpful things that I'm interested in. I don't really use it for writing. So yeah, richiebilling.com is the place to go. But emails as well, and like you mentioned, the Discord server. That's where it's all at. But we'll go into that a bit later on, I imagine.
Yeah. Oh, actually, we can go into that right now. I want to know Richie Billings community of writers. Austin, Holly, and I joined at some point, and I think it was I saw that through Instagram with a really cool graphic, and we joined each on our own. But tell us a little bit about this work, because this is amazing community of writers. I mean, you put together the people that are there. It's where Holly and Austin and I and a few others met with our writing group. And now we have our podcast. So it's almost like you're responsible for this, Richie.
I agree.
All your fault.
Even when I first started thinking about writing, I was like, I don't really know anything. I love reading fantasy, but I didn't know anything about writing fantasy or about writing. I still don't, but that's besides the point. And so I was Googling, I'm like, what's a good fantasy podcast to listen to? And Richie, it was your podcast. And
Oh,
so I was
that's
listening to
right.
your podcast, and then you had mentioned your Discord, and I was like, well, that's probably a pretty good place to start. And I was just overwhelmed by the incredible people in this community you've built. Like they're so supportive, they're so helpful, whether you're looking for, just the like help with your first line or help with a query letter or, whatever it is, there's somebody in there who will help you. And that's amazing. I think it's incredible what you've done.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad that it's helped you, all of you. That's the main thing. Firstly, I should probably come up with a new name. I think it's probably the most inventive of names.
Hey, I mean, it works. We're all
It
part
works.
of it.
We're fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
No, yeah. But it started about because there was never really I always struggled with getting advice and finding people to connect with. And I mean, although writing is quite solitary, there comes a point where you need other people. It's not. It's solo up to a point, and then it's a team effort. But there was never really a space for anyone to connect with. And at the time, the best I could think of was Facebook groups, and that just went really weird. Facebook. So Discord, and I was a complete noob on Discord. I still am. I've barely figured out what's going on Discord, but I really like it. It's just a really immediate way of connecting with people, and you just connect with people on a much more meaningful level. So people just seem to, I push people towards it because I personally think it's a better experience, and everyone else seems to think that as well. So bit of anecdotal evidence there. But what I really like about it is it's just grown naturally. Like we don't have moderators. We don't have like any roles really. There was one guy who's really helpful in setting up more of the structure. Because I just had very basic things, but this guy put it all together. So it's when you join, you can talk about fantasy and you can get beta reads on things, which I think is probably one of the biggest benefits, because if you work on short stories, it's really hard to find people to look at them. So beta reading, and you can just swap stories and stuff like that. It's great, and get like feedback from like 7 or 8 different people. So yeah, stuff like that. But I think when I realized that it was like a proper community was when there was this movement to create the critique groups, and I think that's when you guys all joined the critique group. Is that right? Yeah, and I think that was all community led. I helped out minimally. I was like, I'm here if you need me to do anything, but people just took it on and form. It just went by like really with ease. There was no issues, no complaints. And I think that's a big testament to the people, because it's the people that make the community. Like anyone can make a community, but you might just get a load of neo-Nazis in it. You know what I mean? And it's the people that make it, and the people who take the time to share their advice and their opinions, and to share new resources that they find. And I don't know, there just seems to be like a really good group of people who are interested in doing it.
Yeah, and it's great because it's like I've been on Discord servers similar, but it was like always around like NaNoWriMo, where it's like, oh, everybody's active for like a couple of weeks in October, November, and then boom, everything's gone for the whole year. And so that's actually how I found yours. Is I was asking one of the people in there, I'm like, what do you do the rest of the year? And he's like, oh, I'm part of Richie's Discord. I'm like, I don't know who that is, but like I'll go check it out. And like it's been so nice to have that same support kind of throughout the whole year, and really a place to go and be like, hey, can somebody read this and tell me, honestly, like, be brutal, tell me what you think. Because that's another hard thing, is like not only getting beta readers, but getting beta readers that are going to be, actually honest with you, instead of being like, oh yeah, I liked it.
Right.
So,
and even our writing group that we joined, the one that you were just talking about, the critique group, we started and we actually just celebrated our 1-year anniversary we had recently, last month or a month or two ago. And we meet every other week, aside from if there happens to be like some weird thing where no one can do it. But every other week for the past year, we've been getting together. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And do you think it's helped?
Oh, yeah.
So much.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think that's when you want to join a critique group, I think that's when you decide to take the step to like properly go for it. Because I think that is the way to the next level. You need the work, you need the support network, the honesty, and the regular feedback. Yeah, so I completely agree. It's revolutionary for your writing.
Game changer. And just for new listeners, there's a ton of different channels in this Discord, and I will provide the link down below for you to join. There's world building, magic systems, characters, bestiary, resource links, book descriptions, idea discussions, along with beta reads discussion, first lines, writing groups. This
All
is
sorts of stuff.
this is a huge selection of great, like you said, Richie, great people. I mean, we're all together still. All of us that joined the writing group, or that we kind of created, or that was created for us, we're still together. I mean, like this place is just full of amazing people, and we're looking for more amazing people. Is there anything that you? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, there's a few best-selling authors knocking about in there as well. I feel like when I've been speaking to them for the podcast, so you just invite people to say if you want to join. And, I know there's like Steve Aryan's in there somewhere, and we've got a few literary agents as well. So it's like it's not just writers, it's artists, it's poets, it's anyone who wants to connect with like-minded people. And I think, I don't know, it's just great creative space.
Well, it's really nice to have such an assortment of people as well, right? Because you don't, you want your book to be accessible, or whether it's a story or whatever you're working on, to be accessible to everybody, not just one certain group of people. And by having people that are outside of that group, you might, they shed light on your work that you wouldn't have gotten from your normal group of people. And I just love that. Just, it's such a great community.
Yep. All right. Well, let's get into self-editing. Sorry, that took a turn, but we want everyone to know and join, because there's a new writer every day, and like Richie said, it's a lonely journey, but you don't have to do it alone. You jump in here with a great community. But now we're going to talk about the intricacies of self-editing. Richie, you said you're editing. What genre are you editing?
Fantasies at the moment. Epic. What is it? Probably more high fantasy.
Okay.
I've got a novel on the go. I absolutely hate editing novels. Just gonna put that up there.
Yeah.
Just so long.
So.
Well, and like I have a problem with my self-editing, that mine almost always, every time I do a pass, gets longer, and like I don't think this is how it's supposed to work. So I need to be more brutal with my economy of words and just cutting stuff. But
yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you have any rules for yourself, Richie, about self-editing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest rule is don't start by line editing.
Okay.
Because it's just a waste of time, pretty much, at that point. I think you've got to look at it as like a process. And I don't know, in a sort of vague way, this is how I imagine it in my head, is that when you decide to write a novel or a story or whatever, I just imagine it as like a blob of clay, and where the sculptor's trying to create the image, and after the first draft, it still looks like a mess.
Yeah, definitely.
And you've got to look at like what you need the most important parts, like what you need to sort of make it stand up. For example, you need to fix the legs and stuff like that, and the structure essentially. So there's like certain elements that I'd look at first. So I always look at character, whether they're developed enough, whether they're basically what happens with the plot points, their emotional journeys. I sort of focus on the characters' emotional journeys more than anything in the story, because that's what is more true to life, isn't it? So you have positive interactions with like obstacles and like that they're trying to achieve, and then it just sort of see how they get on first, and I plot it all out on a graph, which is quite helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you a good visual insight.
Yeah.
In simple sense, of story is character A wants this objective, like Frodo wants to destroy the ring.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice and simple in a broad sense, and the story is everything that happens in between to try and stop Frodo from getting that. And that's where it gets complicated. Yeah, so that's what I look at and just try and chart that progression on the graph.
Mm-hmm.
And as they come into contact with things that are trying to stop them from getting what they want, is it a positive outcome in which the graph goes up, or is it a negative outcome goes down? And then if you know your story's boring, if your line is that straight, if you've got no conflict, there's no emotional journey. So that's one thing that I look at. That's characters, and then tied to that is plot. Like I have a weird relationship with plot because when I started writing, I loved it. It was the focus of everything. Like when I think about fantasy, I always think about the biggest plot points in Lord of the Rings. You know what I mean? The great battles and stuff. Are you guys the same?
Yeah, the big action points. Yeah. No, I'm exactly the same. I don't write high fantasy, but I absolutely, in my head, when I'm creating a story, I think of big action points. I do.
See, I write mostly high fantasy, but I write big action scenes so that I can have a campfire scene afterwards where everybody's talking. Like those are the beats that I love. It's just like everybody just sitting there talking, which apparently maybe I need to write cozy fantasy more because that's like the whole point is, actually the characters interacting. So
how about you, Holly?
Go on, Holly.
I love my little battle scenes, and I don't know why. Maybe this comes from my love of like horror or something like that. But I always love incorporating, and I'm doing this now in my second novel too, these little fighting scenes, whether it's like between people that are like practicing fighting, or a lot of the time these like horror creatures that I've created, the main character will be battling some sort of creature. And I feel like it's because I build my character's personality around the fact that they love to do these things and they really excel, in these fight scenes, which is hilarious because I personally know nothing about fight scenes at all. Never been in a boxing match, nothing, like zero experience here.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's why I try and put those a lot throughout my story because I just really, really love them.
You have to go and do some first-hand research, Holly.
Yeah,
there you go.
I'm just gonna go get
do some sparring. Street fight.
Down to the bar and start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go break a bottle. Go for it.
It's really cool the way plot and characters so inextricably linked because we might come up with a plot point. It's then a test to see how the character gets on when you interact with it. And I don't know if you guys have ever written something and you think, oh, that doesn't really work because this character wouldn't really react in that way. So everything goes out the window.
Yeah. I've talked about this before, but like I did that with my very first novel, and the main character backed himself into a corner. I'm like, the only way he survives this is if he runs away. I'm like, that is antithetical to who this character is. I'm like, well, I guess the main character's got to die. Like, cool, I'll find another main character halfway through the book. And it's like, because if you're not planning, and I'm definitely not a planner, so I'm like, well, I probably should have figured something out earlier than this, but that's why editing is so important.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I look at when I'm going through and editing is like every scene I'm like, does this make sense? Or, if a character says something, there was a couple times where I'm like, I want them to say this, but it's not what they would say. Like, there's no way that this character would ever say this, despite the fact that I want them to say it. So it moves my plot forward, at which point you have to go back and, do a whole rewrite after banging your head off the wall for a little while. But that's okay. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, which is to Richie's point about not doing the line editing. It's like if you're focused on like, oh, how is this one sentence going? Well, that sentence might not even make it to the next draft, so it doesn't really matter if it doesn't fit. So
yeah, I think someone explained to me like there's no point trying to replace the windscreen wipers on a car when the engine's fucked.
Yes, exactly.
You're right. That makes sense.
Yeah, so you plot, I think, and character very similar, and then if you're doing fantasy, you probably look at world building, make sure it's not info dumpy and stuff. And it's just taking a sort of broader developmental look at the story, making sure it all works, it all makes sense. And then you can sort of get into the nuts and bolts of like the line by line stuff, the dialogue. I'd throw theme in with the first lot because I don't know how you guys approach theme, but it's a bit of a tricky one, vague. But I don't always write to a theme. What about you? Do you guys place much emphasis on that?
I think theme for me comes out later. That's got to be at least 3 or 4, not rewrites, but editing sessions. Then I'll start picking up. For me, Richie, and I really got to take that to heart. Next time I do my book, my first run through is their emotional journey first. I usually wait till later. Then I kind of see where it would fit better. But that's where I start finding themes and through that emotional journey, the character arcs, betrayal or, something like that. I'll start peppering that through. I'll, add little bits of like chocolate chips in there. I'm always thinking about food. Sorry.
Yeah, but like I think it's easier to like do the first draft and then read through it and be like, hey, what themes are kind of naturally here, and then how do I emphasize that going forward? And like I have as an author like my own specific tropes and themes that come up regularly, just because like whenever I'm writing it, like the fact that heroes tend to be very villainous in my books, like it's a theme that comes up, is like anybody trying to be the hero often is like, well, you maybe have some issues where it's like you need to be important and you need to be the savior, and that has its own complex. Like that's a common theme of like my books is beware of heroes, I guess, which is not great, but hey, it's me. But yeah, I think it's easier to do,
though, isn't it? I suppose what I love about fantasy is it really is on a quite a broad level just an exploration of good versus evil. What does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be bad? Everything in between. And that's what my fantasy, like if I have to say what the theme is of all of my stories, is what is good and what is bad, good versus evil. And you just boil down or focus on different aspects of exploring that one thing. And that's what I really love. Like my novella is about like a revolution against a corrupt regime in a city. And that's again good versus evil. But it's at the same time, it's all a matter of perspective.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's the common theme of mine is I like to play them against each other. So it's like I have something similar that I'm doing in a Kindle Vela right now, where it's like they're revolting against an evil regime, but then it's like half the chapters are also from that evil regime. And they're like, oh, these people are revolting. We're just trying to keep the peace. We're trying to do all these things. And like just getting the two sides of like both of them see each other as the villains. And it's like, well, what is good and evil? Like, are we just like all blaming each other, the us versus them, and we're all wrong?
Yeah.
Which you can find the answer to on our last podcast on villains.
They're all villains.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, I have my tropes that kind of fall throughout the story. One thing that I do right from the beginning is before I even start is I go through and I create an entire backstory for my character. And within that backstory, I write like the very last line is what they are hoping to accomplish in this story. And so I know right from the beginning with my first draft when I'm writing to keep that in mind for each character. Like, okay, this is what they're hoping to achieve. So where are we at with, accomplishing that? And then I just fine tune it as I go forward. But I think I did three drafts myself before I sent it out to beta readers, like a full read. And then I went back, and after that, I actually did all my line by line editing once I had their kind of input on things.
Nice.
Takes forever.
It is a process, and like I say, the more editing you do, and with each step you take or each sort of round of drafts, that sort of vague blob becomes more of a clearer structure, and so it is worth it in the long run.
I think that doing it yourself really helps you when you go on to writing your next piece. because it's going to change the way that you view your writing. And so some of those smaller mistakes that you maybe made before, you're seeing and you're catching before you even make them on the next one.
And I just want to be clear real quick. We're doing self-editing, but it's for us first. We're not ready to put this up for sale yet. We've talked to editors before, so we definitely want to recommend like a professional editor to go through your book after you've done self-editing. But yeah, this is just all the little stuff, because it takes, Richie, you said it's a process, right? I mean, it can take, it takes a year to write maybe, and maybe another year to edit. I mean, I don't know, but
I think it takes
can be
so
a
much
while.
longer to edit.
Yeah.
I think probably 18 months it took me to edit a novel.
Okay.
Still
Yeah.
editing it now.
Yeah, I feel like I could write the novel in like 3 months, but then it would take me a year and a half to edit it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you, when you do your editing, like your line editing, do you print it out and do it that way, or do you do it digitally?
Yes, I always start with printed out version.
Print it out. Okay.
I love it. I just love pen and paper. But yeah, it's just nice just to read it and then make notes on the side. And then you go through it again as you're typing up them notes. So you do get you get like 2 rounds in essentially. And what I tend to do when I edit, I don't just look at character and then read all once through character and then next one, plot, read it all through. I'll do all of them at the same time, and that's why it takes long. Because I'll do like all the sort of the first edits, for example, would be like your character, your plot, theme, make sure it all makes sense, do all them together, and then you go through it again.
You know what's fun, and I'm being completely sarcastic, my second language is plot holes. Like, I have a lot of high action stuff. I have a lot of plot devices, MacGuffins, if you will, and I have all kinds of backstabbing going on. So I'll finish my book, and then I'll like, okay, wait a second. I just put this guy in I painted him in a corner, so to speak, and well, how the heck am I going to get this guy out? Like, plot holes they drive me up the wall. Do you guys usually find that too after you're finished, or are you trying to shape them up while you're writing your first draft?
Oof. I mean, however you can. I think one great thing is like, I know I've like had people ask like about foreshadowing and things like that, or seen people talk about it, and like plot holes are a very similar thing. It's like, okay, you back them into a corner, but like, what could you go and change earlier in the book that like triggers in that moment of the plot hole where you're like, here's how they get out. It's like you don't have to solve it in that chapter, and I think that's what makes plot holes so like difficult, is like when you're like, okay, here's the hole, I've got to plug it somehow, but it's like, oh well, maybe instead of worrying about plugging it in chapter 40, I can plug it in chapter 3 by making this offhanded comment and then mention it again 10 chapters later. So it's like it's come up a couple of times and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot about such and such, and then like that way it's not out of nowhere. It's been mentioned several times, and then your readers, as they pick up on it, they're like, oh yeah, why aren't they thinking about this? And then the character does, and you're like, very satisfying.
I think it depends on the plot hole. It depends on how big it is and what it is.
That's very true.
One thing for me on my last book was there's a magical barrier and only certain people can cross it. And I had mentioned it kind of in the beginning of the book, but then towards the end, there was a couple offhand comments made by other characters about crossing, or people who had crossed the barrier. And I caught it when I was doing my editing, and I was like, wait a second, they wouldn't technically be able to cross. And then when I realized that they wouldn't have been able to cross the barrier, I was like, oh my gosh, that means that, all these other people wouldn't have crossed either, which then opened up like a whole other plot hole that I then had. It was like a chain of events that I had to go back through and figure out. So that one was like a big one where I had to like take a step back and sit down and be like, okay, like write it out. This is the main problem with this barrier. And then these people shouldn't have been there. So how can I change? So I ended up changing the backstory of one of my characters to fit with, everything else. Because if I didn't change their backstory, then I was going to have to completely unravel this whole book and reconfigure this barrier. So I think in that case, it was like a whole thing, right? And that one was a little more difficult to plug, and it wasn't something I could change in the beginning. It was something that I had to go through and either tweak this character's backstory in the end or completely unravel the whole thing.
Yeah, and that makes me think too, like something I do that's like the very first thing I try and do if I don't do it while I'm writing, because I'm a pantser, not a plotter or a planner, is I do my outline after I've written the book, and then I'm like, okay, so chapter 1, here's what happens, and like, what's the significance? What role does this play in like the story structure? And doing all that afterwards, so I can be like, does this make sense? Is it a hot mess? What needs to be rearranged? And then plus, whenever you're referring back to like, oh, hey, this plot hole, it's like, well, where all does this fit? It's a little easier to go through your own like story once you have that structure there. So if you didn't do it in the beginning, at the end's a really good time to actually take the time to lay that out. So it's easier. Like it just makes your whole world easier having an organizational system, even if it's just saying, hey, here's what you did do.
How do you take care of yours, Richie?
You kind of know, don't you, when it doesn't work. And I don't know, I just can't carry on knowing that it's not fit, doesn't make sense. So usually I have to go back and rewrite things. But there's still times when I miss things. Like I've decided to work with an editor on the novel that I'm trying to get out there. And she's pointed out some really, really good things that, I mean, not plot holes, but they're just sort of weaknesses. They're sort of like plot cracks, I suppose. Shaky ground. So yeah, and yeah, it's really good now. Instead, like it's tightened up a lot, and there's new, more exciting things in there. So yeah, it's always tricky with plot, and I always think it's weird. It's a weird one because you're just trying to make the best guess, because there's any way you could take a story, and you might come up with all different ones, different routes that they could follow, but it's just your judgment at the end of the day at which one could be the best or the most exciting. And sometimes you just don't get it right. And I think it's just, you've got to accept and be prepared and open-minded enough to go back and change it.
Right. And I think that's a good point, Richie, because that's usually what I'll fall back on. I'll get lost in like, well, what works best or whatever. I'll be like, well, wait a second. This is my story. I'm writing for myself. What's exciting to me? Like, what is it that I want to read? Ooh, Richie has a cat. The fun. Anyway, that's my ADD talking. But but yeah, I mean, I got to pick out what's like that make me get excited and run with that.
I think it's really important. You gotta write what you'd love to read, what you enjoy. Otherwise, you're just never going to finish it.
Yeah, that's true.
I have this is not really related to editing, but when I sent out my beta read, I actually sent it to my cousin, who's an English teacher, so she could kind of go through and catch some of the weird things that I might have missed. And it was really cool because since she's related to me, she said that she's read a lot of books, and this was the first one that she's read by someone that she knows. And so it was really cool for her because she's like, I can tell when I'm reading the parts of the story that are coming from you as a person. Like, when I talk about horses in my book, she's like, you can tell that it's something that you're knowledgeable about. It's not just something you're talking about, but something that you know. Or when I mentioned my favorite candy in the story, she's like, I know right away that that's your favorite candy, and that's why the character likes it. So do you guys find that you do that in your writing, that when you're, put little bits of yourself in it or in the characters?
Yep. And unfortunately, I write female characters, so I don't know what my subconscious is trying to say, but
hey, my self insert's female too. It's fine.
Okay, yeah, there you go. How about you?
But yeah,
bits of yourself, don't you? And
yeah.
Sometimes you don't realize until you're editing, and then you see it. It's like, oh, actually,
yeah. Sometimes I'll have a character say something. I'm like, man, that's just me saying that, isn't it? So. Yeah, and it's one of those things, like, you always have to find the line, because like realistically, like, every character is like some part of you, because like you're creating them, and it's like, even if it's like I took a part of me and then like flipped it and got the negative, like it's still going to be very clearly me and my voice. Even like when I put a villain in there, like that is the thing that I think is villainous, and like that's going to be coming through, and people are going to get to see who Austin thinks is villainous, and like it's a weird thing to think about and kind of a heavy thing to think about whenever you're like sharing your work with people, you know. Like it's a lot easier for me to be like, oh hey, yeah, I'll put this out on the internet, it's fine. But like whenever it's like somebody I know reading it, I'm like, well, you're gonna get a really good view at how I see the world.
Well, I mean, I think that matters too, because each of us can write a book about a boy who found a dragon, and they're all going to be different. You know, the whole like story, if you will be the same, but I think that's important. Like it's like kind of we use our background, right, and our experiences and things we like, things we want to see, and that's how you write character voice.
Sorry. Bob, you just reminded me of a short story I want to write, because I want to do a thing where somebody's asked to deliver a dragon, and they like come and they deliver the dragon, like bring it to the person. They're like, I wanted you to deliver a dragon, like take the liver. I just need to deliver. I don't want a dragon.
Oh, gosh.
So.
That's funny. Yeah, Richie's cat is climbing. That's exactly what I have to close the door. I have 2 cats and I have to keep them out. Yeah. Oh, she wants to leave? Okay. She doesn't like us anymore.
Yeah, if you listen closely to our podcast, you can hear the scratching at the door in Bob's.
Yeah. Well, we got characters, emotional journeys. I wish we could jump deeper into that one. We're going to have to maybe have you back on for that. That sounds like a really good topic. How about we got plot points? What else would there be to self-editing?
Something I was thinking about, like I kind of mentioned it earlier, like with the foreshadowing and stuff, but like if you get to a point where you've got like, hey, the only way out of this plot point is to do like a Deus Ex Machina, like I've ended up there in a couple of points where I'm like, oh man, I didn't really set this up well. Like go and set it up. Take the time. It's not hard. Like you don't have to do it ahead of time. You can do all these things in post. Like that's the great thing about writing, is it's not a performance art. Like you get all the time in the world to set things up.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think when you get down to the nitty gritty of editing, then so you're looking at the line by line stuff. So there are a few rules that you can keep in mind.
Okay.
I know agents and editors particularly hate adverbs.
I
think it's a bit unjustified.
Right.
Adverbs are okay.
We're all just sitting here grinning at your cat.
Yeah. Sorry.
What she's up to? She's trying to go to. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. So adverbs, they hate them. I had a meeting with this agent. He was like he's pretty like high flying agent in the UK, and he just grilled me for 20 minutes about how I used adverbs. So just be careful of them guys.
Not too many.
But yeah, just adjectives and just tighten up your prose generally. Like prose is just a matter of just like reining it all in. Just be a bit florid if you want, but you're gonna have to balance it out. So not too many adjectives. I like Orwell's rules for writing. I think one of them is if there's a way to say it shorter, say it shorter.
Yes.
Don't use unnecessarily big words when you can use simple ones.
Absolutely.
Because it's all about conveying your image and your message to as many people as possible. So there's no point using fancy words.
Especially words you don't have no idea what they mean. You have to go look it up. Like don't if that's not in your daily jargon, then leave it out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
Hemingway like spent hours and hours over like sentences just to try and make them as like clear, as simple as possible. And you read his stuff and you think this is really like it's not technical in any way, shape, or form. And then you read Tolkien and it takes you like 20 pages to get used to it. But that's what the beauty of Hemingway's writing is it's clear. And that's one of the things with prose. There's like different approaches, like the clear pain, which is what Orwell coined. And what he means by this is that when you read the story, it should be like looking through a clear pane of glass to the image that the story is what is creating essentially. And then you get more florid prose, which is like a stained glass window, and it's harder to see through. So yeah, there's different approaches. You can mix the two. I think Brandon Sanderson was a bit of a fan of doing this. So he might like in certain parts you might get a bit more florid. So you might get like descriptions of places, descriptions of people. and it works quite well. Or like the start of chapters, I
Yeah.
find people just seem to. It might be their way of their process of getting into that chapter. It's like they've got to start a bit more flowery, and then they focus their mind on like the actual what's going on. But yeah, it's prose is beautiful because it's unique to everybody, and that's one of the best things about writing. Like you said before, we can all tell the same story, but it'll all be told in different ways, and then it'll told in the sense that it's language is used, different sentence structures, paragraph lengths, the way the tension builds with the structure and stuff like that. There's so many different ways, like on a technical level, that you can do that. So yeah, prose, but don't treat them all as rules. Just see what works for you. I think that's the main thing.
And you'll find out too, because you're like, well, I don't know what works, but I like what I'm doing here, and then you can present it to your critique group, or somebody else, and they'll read it and go, ooh, wow, this is a little, because we do that with our writing group every session. This part was a little hard to read right here, this paragraph, this sentence, and then that feedback is absolutely necessary. Again, just kind of plugging in Richie Billings community Discord, but because it's so essential. Otherwise, we don't know, especially new writers. I mean, once you're James Patterson, okay, you're fine. You can write however you want. But for those of us trying to break in and we're trying to tell a good story, that feedback is definitely an essential part of this process.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, when you're talking about like all the like grammar and adverbs and all that, it's about giving the clearest picture possible, like Richie was talking about with the window versus the stained glass window, like being as direct as possible. But that's where the community comes in, like giving it to alpha readers and beta readers and critique groups. It's like having them be like, hey, I didn't understand what was happening here. And like, even whenever I think a lot of people, when they talk about adverbs, it's that same kind of thing. It's like, well, very pretty is a very vague. It's like, I don't know what's going on here. You say there was some people in the tavern. Were there 3 or were there 30? Like, the more clarity you can give, the better picture people have of it, and they can get a similar experience to everybody else in the same story. And I think that's where a lot of this comes down to, is how do you convey your story as clearly as possible to a wide variety of people.
With that being said, that's also something that I try and keep an eye on when I'm doing my editing, is making sure that I'm explaining enough for the reader to understand what I mean, but not over explaining. And I feel like that's something that I do see with a lot of new writers, is that when we're first starting out, we're putting every single detail in there, like, and then they walked to the table, and then they sat at the table, and then, they pulled out their chair at the table, and it's like, we get it. They're at a table. And those are like little details that you're using up your word count for something that, let the reader assume that if they're seated at a table, they're seated at the table. You don't have to tell me that, show me that they're going to be sitting there by whatever action it takes to do that helps move the story along, instead of using up valuable words. And those are definitely things that I catch even in my own editing. I'm like, I don't need to say that they moved across the room to have a conversation with someone that we already know is across the room, right? We can just assume that they made it there.
Yeah.
But it's like when you're starting out, you're learning to trust your readers as well as like trust your own writing. You've got to like learn that they can understand things, and actually less is more, because not telling them everything, it forces them to think and engage more with it. So it's just finding a balance.
Yeah, definitely. How many times do we go through until we feel we can send this off? Like, okay, this is about as good as I can get it before a pro editor. How many sessions? If
I
we could
did
call
18 months of editing on this novel and sent it off to a load of agents. Didn't get any positive responses. I think I probably sent about 30 agents. Didn't hear nothing back. I was like, all right, I need to get someone to look at this.
Okay.
So that's when I decided. I was chatting with an editor friend, and then she decided it'd be a good idea for her to have a look at. Or I decided that myself, actually. But it was, it's been really eye-opening. And I do recommend, right, I know it's an expense, but you could do it with a short story, is paying an editor just to look at one of your stories because they'll point out things like repeated errors that you make.
Yep.
And that sort of professional critique is really invaluable. Like, I'm terrible with commas in certain circumstances.
Mm.
And it's just like when I'm going through edits now, she's just constantly like suggesting, take this comma away, take this comma away, take this comma away. I'm just going through, just clicking the comma button and just go, oh, I need to learn this lesson. But she's pointed that out now, and now I'm not gonna do it again.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So 18, and then do you say 30 after that, or after 30 agents, something like that?
Yeah, that he put out.
I misheard. Yeah.
That's why I just gave up after 30 agents. I thought this isn't good enough.
Okay.
But that's because I suffer from crippling imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
I mean, people just go, yeah, keep firing out 100 agents, see what happens. But
Right.
I don't want to send it to loads of people and then have it no one else to send to after.
Yeah.
So I was like, test the water with 30. If 30 don't
Yep.
bite, I think that's a fair,
Okay.
fair crack of the whip.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my first book was that was the 8th rendition. That until it was like published and on and available for sale. But it's a lot. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, be ready for this, because this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Don't and also, we might be getting into the don'ts here.
We
This
can
is
go ahead
not-
and jump in.
We can jump in. Okay. But this isn't my don't, so I have to say anyway. But don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up because you feel like you're not getting it after 2 or 3. Like, no, just it takes some time. Go look at any sculpture, beautiful sculpture, Michelangelo, his David. That didn't take a couple of weeks. Okay, that took a long time. That's what we're doing. We're sculpting. We're polishing. We're taking chunks off that don't need to be there. So yeah. Okay, so don'ts. Here we are. Time for our don'ts officially.
Okay, I'll just jump in. Don't be afraid of the full rewrite. It's fine. Like, if you need to,
Yep.
sometimes you need to. And you know what? If you get to a point where your novel is like you've gone through a couple of passes of the edit and it's just like it's not working, but if you can nail down why it's not working and be like, if I just changed all these, well, go change all those things. Like, make a list of like, this is what didn't work. I still like the basic idea of the story, and just rewrite it. It honestly doesn't take that long once you have a full structure like that. It's not so bad. It's not half as bad as you think. It's like a third as bad as you think.
Yeah. Who's next? Okay, I'll do it. Don't. This is my official don't. Don't. I know we're talking about editing, self-editing, but I know that so many people get stuck on the first chapter. Finish your entire book first and then go through and edit. There's no flipping way you're going to get the first perfect chapter at a time. Absolutely not. Go through the entire thing first, okay? The end, let it sit for a while. People recommend weeks off. I'll probably spend a weekend off not looking at it. Then I can't wait to get back into it. And then I'm ready to do what we're talking about, the characters, the plots, the pacing and all that. But you can't figure all that out just when you're stuck in the first chapter. So do not get stuck doing that. So that one's mine. Next.
Richie, do you want to go?
Go on, Holly, after you.
All right. I would say don't be afraid to do your own editing, just because, like I said earlier, it is going to help make you a better writer. Because as you're going through and you're correcting your own mistakes, you're going to be training your brain to not make them again in the future. So as much as we all hate editing, I don't know how people ever have careers as editors. I think they're insane. But anyways, as much as we hate editing, it's totally worth it. I did 5 rounds total on Heartbound before I felt like it was ready to be out in the world. In every single round, I learned something. And I have, now that I've started on the Blood Sky, I have taken all of the stuff that I've learned from making all of these changes and these edits, and I have now I have to make new mistakes that I get to learn how to fix through my next round of editing. But it's really going to help you become a better writer, because you're not just handing it off to someone right away and saying, here, this is, fix, tell me what's wrong with this. You're taking the time to think through it, and you're starting to understand what's wrong with it instead of just being told. So don't be afraid to edit your own work, and don't be afraid of how long it takes for you to do it, because it's a long time.
or how many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're all different. So we're all in a different journey. And I also feel like my books I purposely made short, like 60, 70,000 words. I mean, if you're writing high fantasy, that's going to take a long time to go through that. So,
yeah.
All right, Richie.
A good point where you made, you said there about focusing on the firsts. And I think this is a really important thing. So when you've been through everything, spend time on your first line, first paragraph, first page. I think the first 5 pages, there's a really good book by this editor called Noah Lukeman, and it's called The First 5 Pages. Recommend that. Because that's where you win or lose your reader. So it does pay off to spend a bit of time. Like I had in this novel that I'm editing, I put this first chapter in, I tacked it on after I'd finished writing it. I just ended up really like hating it. And I was getting beta reading feedback and stuff like that, and people just not liking it. Very mixed bag. So I just decided to delete it. The whole chapter. That was better. So yeah, firsts are really important, worth spending time on. And as for my don'ts, don't start by line editing, or don't start with line by line editing. That's the main one I'd say, because I've done that. You just think, oh, I've finished it now, I'll just go back to the start and start going through line by line. And it's just, like you say, it's a waste of time, because you might find halfway through that doesn't actually work, none of it. So you need
I can't imagine how terrible to go line by line and then be like, oh, I need to do a full rewrite now.
Yeah. And that's like, even for me, that's why I didn't even bother doing my line by line. And I printed mine out as well, but I didn't even bother doing a line by line until I had done multiple rounds of editing, and then it had gone out to beta readers, because like, I don't want to spend all this time doing like line by line editing and then them come back and be like, oh, actually I found these other little mistakes, or, you know, other plot holes that I then had to rewrite for, because then you have to go back and line by line the whole thing all over again. So
so that's super important.
All right.
So, I know this isn't a don't, but I want to add something on real quick. So don't hate me. I always end by reading the whole thing out loud, because that's super helpful for me. And it helps you catch those things, because like you can get really glazed over when you're reading the same thing 80 times. So it helps if you read it out loud. At least that's my experience. So anyways, bye.
Do you use a different accent, like a cowboy accent or anything?
Oh, actually, one of my high fantasy worlds, I do imagine everybody having a high fantasy accent. So actually, y'all have met Stark in our critique group, and Stark he's got a super old style Western accent in my mind. So
nice.
Yeah, so he's from a world of Westerns.
I always, it's always brilliant to read out loud, but I had an ex-girlfriend, and I was reading out loud one night in my little study. My ex-girlfriend walked past and just like knocking on the door. I was like, "What are you talking to?" Like, completely freaked out by the whole thing. Yeah, don't let anyone feel weird about reading out loud. It's part of the process.
Yeah,
no, for sure. I mean, I DM for Dungeons and Dragons sometimes, and so I just practice voices too. And I'm like, that definitely will get people's attention if they overhear.
That's awesome. Yeah,
I'm terrible at reading anything out loud, because I can read the emotion, but I can't portray it. And so with my book, actually, because I write in Word, I use their like AI to read it out to me, or their like reader or whatever. And I caught so many mistakes that way. But I cannot imagine, just like, I wouldn't even want to listen to it if I read it out loud.
Yeah. And we highly recommend going to your local coffee shop and doing this, reading it out loud. Everyone can hear
book an amphitheater, it's fine.
Okay. All right, Richie, one more time, where can we find you?
Best place is richiebilling.com. You can join mailing list and find loads of writing guides and podcast stuff and everything there. I've made it easy, hopefully.
Perfect. All right. We had so much fun with you, Richie. I'm just so happy that we got to have you on, and that because like I said, you're responsible for all of this, so we appreciate that.
Mhm.
We love what you're doing. We love what you've done. You know, you just created a stage for all of us to play on, and it means a lot to all of us writers. Thank you so much. And now, Richie, yeah, of course. Now you do have your podcast. I completely forgot about that. What's the name? Is it just Richie Billings podcast, or what do you get? What is it?
that name's a bit more inventive. It's the Fantasy Writers Tool Shed, that one.
Okay.
A bit more of a focus on fantasy, but we do get like with Jennifer Alarman on to the last guest. She's the biggest name I've had on, I think.
I was fangirling hard when I found that out. I was very excited. I was like, this is the best combination I've ever had on a podcast.
Yeah. And I will say yours is a lot more focused than ours is. Yeah. So, and a lot more practical. So it's like if somebody actually needs like, hey, like here's some tips and tricks. Yeah. Richie is a great resource.
Yes.
So,
try my best to do that anyway, because sometimes you just end up talking in vagaries and in broad terms. So that's when I'm speaking to these people, I'm like, well, how do you actually do it? You know what I mean? You said this, but how did you actually do it?
That's awesome. Okay, Fantasy Writers Toolshed podcast. So all these links will be in the links below. So, all right. Well, don't forget to. Oh, Richie, we're gonna have you on again. Okay, we have to. We'd love having you. Thank you very much. We'll definitely have you on soon. So, so. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels at the links below so you don't miss any of the Writers Room content. We always love to hear from our listeners. So if you have a question or a topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. And until then, we will say goodbye.
Bye.